Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today we're going to talk about the American Ice Company building behind me. Have to start with a quick thanks to a former colleague, Eli Poussaint, who did some wonderful research on this building and got it listed on the National Register of Historic Places. I also want to start with a request. We are on, I think, month 13 or 14 of doing these videos, and back in the beginning, we heard from lots of you with comments and suggestions and letting me know when I got things wrong. We haven't heard quite as much recently, and here's the request. If you ever got your ice from the American Ice Company, let us know. It was in business until the 1980s, so let us know if you did. Or if you got those big blocks of ice, those 10 or 20 pound blocks from anywhere, let us know, share a story. The last time I got those blocks of ice was about 6 or 7 summers ago. It was a sweltering Memorial Day weekend, and our neighborhood pool in Bolton Hill felt like a hot tub. Thankfully, our pool manager, Alexa, knew where to get blocks of ice, and I think she got 10 50-pound blocks and dumped them in the deep end. And I will tell you that blocks of ice were never so glorious as those blocks on that Memorial Day weekend. All right, back to the building. It was built in 1911 to manufacture ice. That's what it's called, making ice. Before then, where did we get our ice? It was harvested, and that was the term they used also. Harvested, cut out of lakes and ponds and rivers. The Susquehanna River was a source, but we got a lot of our ice in Baltimore from way up in New England, even up into Maine. In 1825 is when we have the first record of the sale of ice. A gentleman named Francis Rivenot, he was from France, but he was a confectioner in Baltimore. He apparently sold ice along with his desserts, maybe to keep his desserts cold, but that was the first sale. 1825 was also a big year for ice manufacture, or for ice cutting, in that a gentleman named Nathaniel Wyeth, who incidentally is very distantly related to the painter Andrew Wyeth, but Nathaniel was an inventor, and he invented the ice plow. It was pulled behind a horse, and it scarred the ice, and you could do it in nice, clean, geometric patterns. And so when you went with your saw and your axe to cut the ice, you could cut it into symmetrical blocks. And that allowed you to be more efficient with the ice, and also to stack it and pack it better, wrap it in sawdust or hay, and send it on down to a place like Baltimore. In Baltimore, our ice sort of use started picking up in the 1830s. In 1837, a gentleman named Thomas Cochrane built 3 enormous ice storage houses, ice houses, on Falls Road. He eventually went on to build more in Essex. And he got his ice from the Susquehanna, but also from the Penobscot and Kennebec rivers up in Maine. So that ice clearly came a long way. And our ice usage started to really tick up. To give some indication, in 1835, Baltimore consumed 1,000 tons of ice. By 1870, we were consuming 80,000 tons of ice. We had 500 people working in the ice industry here, with 250 teams of horses out delivering ice to various places. For the most part, that was to grocers and people like that who needed to keep their produce or their meats cool. But by about 1900, things started to shift, and people started to be able to get ice maybe in a fancy hotel in their drinks. Ice water, what a treat. And that caused the demand for ice to really exceed what could be harvested. And that brings us to manufacturing ice. Manufactured ice actually started in the 1860s in New Orleans. And if you have ever been in New Orleans in August, you will probably sympathize with the motivations for New Orleans folks inventing manufactured ice. But by 1900, ice manufacture had really started to take off. The New York Times did a report in 1900 saying that there were 800 ice manufacturers around the country. And by 1920, there were 5,000. And they reported, maybe with a little bit of a jab to their New England readers, that you could get ice just as cheaply in the southern states as you could in New England. Here in Baltimore, our Thomas Cochrane had consolidated his business with another gentleman, and in 1899 they were bought out by the Knickerbocker Ice Company from New York, that quickly was then consolidated into the American Ice Company, a nationwide giant. They called it the Ice Trust. And in Baltimore, our ice usage also started to tick up, especially when this plant was built in 1911. And here's how it worked. The plant had 2 wells dug 200 or more feet down that brought up 60 gallons of water every minute. And the way the manufacturing process worked was it was through compressed ammonia. Ammonia was compressed and forced into tubes where it was cooled so that it was a liquid. And these liquid ammonia tubes ran through a slurry called a brine of salt water, like a big pool of salt water. And the salt water was able to get so cold, it was able to get below freezing without actually freezing. And so you had this super cool pool of salty water, and into it you would lower a form, a metal form, that looked like a big block, and you'd fill the form with water, you'd lower it down in, and in not too much time, pretty quickly, the water in that would freeze and turn into a big block of ice. A giant claw on the running along rails on the roof of this building would pick up that enormous, maybe 500-pound block of ice and wheeled it over to one end of the building where it would be dropped down onto a table, and people with saws would cut it into more manageable sizes, the 10-pound and 20-pound blocks that we could get. And into the storage house they would go, or maybe out the front door they would go to a desperate grocer who needed a big block of ice in August to keep his produce cool. The manufacturing continued here up until the 1980s. The American Ice Company made it even through the lean years after World War II, when the use of home refrigerators ticked up incredibly. In 1940, about 40% of households in America had home refrigerators. In 1950, so just 10 years later, 80% had. And those gadgets, of course, also came with wonderful little mechanisms where you could manufacture your own ice right in your kitchen. And that put a crimp on ice manufacturing companies like this one. But this survived until the 1980s. By the 1990s, it was no longer used and sitting idle. And in 2004, it had a tremendous fire that burned the original stable buildings and the outbuildings and did some damage to the main building here. But the main building is still strong, and today it's for sale. A gentleman who purchased it several years ago, I think intending to redevelop it, is now selling it. So you could be the next owner of a 110-year-old ice manufacturing building. Probably not so good for making ice anymore, but maybe a gym, or maybe a theater, or here by the West Baltimore MARC station, maybe a set of shops catering to the people coming and going. And with that, I will say thanks so much, and we will see you next time.